Greece invented democracy, philosophy, the Olympics, and basically the foundation of Western civilization itself, and then nearly went completely bankrupt in 2010, with youth unemployment so severe that over half of all young Greeks couldn't find work. This is the country that built the modern world and almost lost everything trying to keep up with it. Greece's independence story, Greece's economic collapse, and Greece's daily reality today get almost zero attention compared to ancient mythology. By the end of this video, you'll understand Greece in a way that goes far beyond anything you learned in a history class. Greece's Ancient Athens around 508 BC created the first known democracy in human history, a system where citizens voted directly on laws rather than electing representatives. Greece's democracy excluded women, slaves, and foreigners, meaning only about 10 to 20% of the population actually participated, but the core concept, that ordinary people should have a voice in governing themselves, fundamentally changed the trajectory of human civilization. Greece's ancient philosophers, including Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, established the foundational frameworks for logic, ethics, and scientific reasoning that Western thought still relies on today. Greece's Aristotle alone made contributions to biology, physics, ethics, politics, and literary theory that remained influential for nearly 2,000 years after his death. Greece hosted the first Olympic Games in 776 BC in the city of Olympia, an athletic competition held every 4 years that became so central to ancient Greek identity that wars were paused during the Games under a truce called the Olympic Truce. Greece's modern Olympics, revived in 1896, were specifically brought back to life in Athens, returning the Games to their birthplace after nearly 1,500 years of dormancy. Greece's mythology gave the world a framework of gods, heroes, and stories so influential that countless modern words, brands, and concepts trace directly back to it. Greece's word, democracy, itself comes from the Greek words demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power or rule. Now here's something most people don't realize about Greece's geography. Greece has somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 islands and islets, though estimates vary because of how small landmasses are counted, and only around 227 of them are actually inhabited. Greece's most famous islands, like Santorini and Mykonos, represent a tiny fraction of this number, while thousands of smaller Greece islands remain completely uninhabited or visited only by a handful of fishermen. Greece's coastline stretches over 13,000 kilometers, making it one of the longest coastlines in the world, despite Greece being a relatively small country by total land area. Greece's geography, dominated by mountains and sea, meant that ancient Greek city-states developed largely independently from each other, which is part of why Greece's ancient world was made up of competing city-states like Athens and Sparta, rather than one unified nation for most of its early history. Greece's modern political history is far more dramatic than most people realize, and it starts with nearly 400 years of foreign occupation. Greece fell under Ottoman Turkish rule starting in the 15th century after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, an event that effectively ended the Byzantine Empire, which had itself been the continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire. Greece spent centuries under Ottoman control, during which Greek language, religion, and culture survived largely through the Greek Orthodox Church and isolated mountain communities that Ottoman authorities struggled to fully control. Greece's fight for independence began in 1821, when Greek revolutionaries launched a coordinated uprising against Ottoman rule, inspired partly by Enlightenment ideas and growing nationalist sentiment across Europe. Greece's War of Independence lasted until 1830 and involved brutal fighting, massacres on both sides, and eventually intervention from major European powers including Britain, France, and Russia, who supported Greek independence partly due to widespread European sympathy for the birthplace of democracy. Greece officially became an independent kingdom in 1832, though the borders of modern Greece continued expanding for decades afterward through additional territorial conflicts, eventually incorporating regions like Crete, Macedonia, and Epirus well into the 20th century. Greece's complicated path to its current borders means that Greek identity and territorial disputes with neighboring countries, particularly regarding Macedonia, remained politically sensitive well into recent decades. Greece's most significant modern crisis began around 2009, when the country revealed its government debt was far larger than previously reported, triggering what became known as the Greek debt crisis. Greece's economy contracted by roughly 25% between 2009 and 2017, a collapse comparable in scale to the Great Depression in the United States. Greece required multiple massive bailout packages from the European Union and International Monetary Fund, totaling hundreds of billions of euros in exchange for severe austerity measures including pension cuts, tax increases, and public sector layoffs. Greece's youth unemployment rate peaked at over 50% during the worst years of the crisis, meaning more than half of young Greeks actively seeking work simply could not find jobs. Greece experienced a massive brain drain during this period, with hundreds of thousands of educated young Greeks leaving the country entirely to find work in places like Germany, the UK, and Australia, a demographic loss Greece is still recovering from today. Greece's crisis led to dramatic political instability, including the rise and fall of multiple governments, mass protests in Athens, and the brief but symbolically significant election of an anti-austerity government in 2015 that ultimately had to accept many of the same bailout conditions it had campaigned against. Greece technically exited its bailout programs in 2018, marking the formal end of the worst phase of the crisis, though the economic and social scars remain deeply felt across the country. Now let's talk about Greece's food, because there's far more to it than gyros and Greek salad. Greece's actual culinary tradition varies enormously by region, with island cuisine relying heavily on seafood, while mainland Greece features more lamb, goat, and hearty stews. Greece's moussaka, a layered dish of eggplant, spiced ground meat, and creamy bechamel sauce, takes hours to prepare properly and is considered a labor of love rather than everyday fast food, despite how it's often presented internationally. Greece's fava, a puree made from yellow split peas rather than actual fava beans, despite the name, is a beloved appetizer particularly associated with the island of Santorini, where the volcanic soil produces a uniquely sweet variety of the peas. Greece's tradition of meze, small shared plates served alongside drinks, mirrors similar traditions across the Mediterranean and Middle East, turning meals into long, social, multi-hour gatherings rather than quick individual dining experiences. Greece produces some of the world's best olive oil, with archaeological evidence showing Greece has been cultivating olives for over 5,000 years, and certain regions like Kalamata have become so associated with specific olive varieties that the name itself is now internationally protected. Greece has specific cultural and religious realities that shape daily life significantly. Greece is overwhelmingly Greek Orthodox Christian, with the church holding significant cultural and even political influence, and Easter, not Christmas, is considered the most important religious holiday on the Greece calendar. Greece's Orthodox Easter often falls on a different date than Western Easter due to Greece's continued use of the Julian calendar for religious calculations, leading to celebrations that can occur weeks apart from Catholic and Protestant Easter dates. Greece maintains a strong tradition of name days, where Greeks often celebrate the feast day of the saint they're named after, with as much or more enthusiasm than their actual birthday, complete with visits from friends and family who simply show up unannounced as part of the tradition. Greece's siesta-like culture means many businesses, particularly outside major tourist areas, close in the early afternoon for several hours before reopening in the evening, a rhythm of life that surprises visitors expecting typical business hours. Greece's tourism industry has become absolutely critical to its economic recovery, with tourism now representing roughly a quarter of the country's entire GDP. Greece received nearly 33 million visitors in recent years. A staggering number considering Greece's own population is only around 10.4 million people, meaning tourists outnumber residents by more than 3 to 1 annually. Greece has had to balance this tourism boom with growing concerns about over-tourism on popular islands like Santorini and Mykonos, where infrastructure strains under the seasonal influx, and some local residents have begun pushing back against the sheer volume of visitors. Here's the truth that ties Greece's whole story together. Greece is a nation that fundamentally shaped how billions of people across the world think, govern themselves, and compete athletically. And yet, Greece's modern economic struggles show that inventing civilization doesn't guarantee economic stability centuries later. Greece's ancient triumphs and Greece's modern crisis aren't separate stories. They're both part of the same long, complicated history of a small country that has repeatedly punched far above its weight, for better and for worse. If this video changed how you see Greece beyond just ancient ruins and island vacations, share it with someone who's never looked past the postcards. Subscribe to Untold Facts, because Greece's modern story deserves just as much attention as its ancient one, and now you know both.